Okay, let's dig into this. In the, lightning fast world of business today, information and technology, well, they aren't just support functions anymore.
No, not at all.
For so many companies, they are the business. But making sure that IT actually drives value, helps hit those strategic goals, manages all the risks that seem to spiral,
Yeah.
and, doesn't just become this huge, expensive, kind of chaotic thing.
Yeah, that's the challenge. It's constant and it's significant.
Right, we're all drowning in information and figuring out a structured, reliable way to, well, govern and manage IT effectively.
Yeah.
It can feel like walking through a minefield blindfolded sometimes.
It's absolutely true. And the stakes are just getting higher. Technology is like deeply embedded in every single process, every interaction now.
Hmm.
So just having the tech isn't enough. You need a clear, consistent approach to make sure it's aligned with the company's mission, that it's secure, efficient, and crucially, that it's genuinely contributing to success.
And that is exactly why frameworks exist, right? And specifically why we're taking a deep dive today into this COBIT 2019 framework.
Yeah.
If you've bumped into enterprise, IT governance, or management, chances are you've heard of COBIT. Think of it as maybe a sophisticated roadmap, a set of best practices and principles designed to help organizations really get a handle on the complexity of governing and managing their IT.
And what's really important for our discussion today is that we're not just working from a summary or someone else's take on it.
Right.
We are pulling directly from the core concepts, the specific details found right within the official COBIT 2019 framework text itself. We're basically walking you through the source material.
So our mission for this deep dive, it's to cut through what can be, let's face it, pretty dense technical documentation.
Mm-hmm.
We want to pull out the most important concepts, the fundamental principles, the core structure, and those practical insights from this material. So by the end of our chat, you should have a really solid, clear understanding of what COBIT 2019 is, why companies turn to it, and exactly how it helps align IT with the bigger business strategy, manage risk, and optimize resources.
Basically making this critical but sometimes dense topic accessible and hopefully really insightful for you.
Exactly. So to understand COBIT 2019, it probably helps to know where it came from, its history.
Yeah, definitely. It didn't just sort of appear, there's an origin story.
Right. So where does it begin?
It really starts back in 1967. You had a group of pioneers in what was then a pretty new field, computing. They saw the potential, but also the challenges brewing.
Okay.
And they got together and formed a nonprofit called ISACA, the Information Systems Audit and Control Association.
Ithaca. Okay, I've heard of them.
Right. And their initial goal, as the source material lays out, was really focused on helping companies and the tech professionals within them manage, optimize, and importantly, protect their IT assets, which were growing fast.
This was when IT was really starting to become critical, wasn't it?
Exactly. The need for structure, for control, was just starting to become clear. And ISACA has since grown into this major global professional body, developing standards, providing education.
And one of their biggest contributions, fulfilling that original mission, was creating COBIT. The first version, COBIT 1, came out when? 1996.
1996, that's right. And COBIT 1 was, interestingly, developed specifically for IT auditors.
So auditors first.
Yes. Back then, different audit practices were using all sorts of different standards. COBIT 1 was ISACA's attempt to create a unified, consistent set of standards just for IT auditing. So its roots are really firmly in that audit and control world.
Okay, it starts with auditors, focused on controls.
Mm-hmm.
But it clearly didn't stay there. It grew quite a bit, didn't it?
Oh, significantly. The source material traces this evolution pretty clearly. COBIT 2 came out in '98, and it expanded to include more detailed IT control guidance, moving a bit beyond just the audit standards.
Okay, a bit broader.
Then came a really key moment in 2000 with COBIT 3.
What was so important about COBIT 3?
That's when it was released as a management framework.
Okay. Big shift.
Huge shift. It wasn't just about checking controls after the fact. It was about providing guidance on how to manage IT processes proactively.
Right, moving from just checking to actually guiding the operations. That's a major leap.
It was, and the evolution kept going. By 2005, COBIT 4.1 came out, and it was positioned as a comprehensive IT governance framework.
Governance now, okay.
Yeah, this really solidified its role as a tool for strategic oversight, not just managing operations or auditing. It started bringing in that board-level perspective on IT.
Which sort of set the stage for COBIT 5 in 2012. The source highlights that one as really key for the current version.
Absolutely critical. COBIT 5 was launched as a truly comprehensive global framework. And a major emphasis, a real focus, was on explicitly mapping enterprise strategy to IT strategy.
Connecting the dots.
Exactly. The goal was a single, integrated framework that could be used across the whole organization, covering everything IT-related, from strategy to operations to monitoring. It really brought governance and management together under one umbrella, though keeping them distinct.
And that foundation led directly to COBIT 2019, the version we're focused on.
Yep. The 2018 update, which is branded as COBIT 2019, it built directly very heavily on COBIT 5, but it brought in key updates to reflect, how the IT landscape had changed again.
Like what kind of updates?
Well, it refined the structure, updated some terminology, and importantly, it integrated a maturity model concept based on CMMI, the capability maturity model integration.
Okay, maturity levels.
Right. And it also added a specific implementation guide to help organizations actually, put the framework into practice. It's the latest iteration designed to be super relevant and adaptable for today's complex digital world.
So you can really see that path. Starts with auditors, grows to guide IT management, then becomes this full framework for strategically governing IT across the whole company.
It perfectly mirrors how critical and complex IT itself has become in business.
Absolutely. And speaking of that complexity, one of the most fundamental concepts that COBIT really hammers home, especially from COBIT 5 onwards into 2019, is that clear split between governance and management.
Ah, yes. The source material is very clear on this. Governance versus management. Why is making that distinction so critical for COBIT?
Because, as the source explains it, they're fundamentally two different things, two unique disciplines.
Okay.
They're related, sure, they depend on each other, but they exist for different reasons, involve different activities, need different structures, different people, and crucially, they need different resources and focus from the organization.
So you can't just mix and match approaches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Trying to use management techniques for governance problems or the other way around, it's just, well, it's inefficient and it doesn't work effectively.
Okay, so let's break that down then, based on the source. Who's typically responsible for governance in a company?
The source material points clearly to the board of directors.
Yeah.
That's where the primary responsibility for enterprise governance, including IT governance, sits.
The board itself.
Yeah, or designated committees of the board. The audit committee, maybe an executive committee, sometimes even specific ones focused on digital strategy or risk.
And what's the role of governance? What does the board actually do in this context?
Their role is really about strategic oversight and direction. The key activities for the governance body are things like evaluating stakeholder needs and strategic options.
Okay, looking outward and forward.
Right. Then directing management by setting priorities and making big decisions like approving the overall IT strategy or major investments. And finally, monitoring performance, compliance, and risk to make sure management is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and hitting the goals.
So overseeing and directing, setting the course.
Exactly. Think oversight, direction, ensuring accountability.
Evaluate, direct, monitor.edm.
That sounds familiar from the COBIT structure itself.
It does, doesn't it? We'll definitely circle back to that domain later, but it shows how deeply this distinction is baked into the framework's DNA.
Yeah, it's not just a concept. It shapes the actual activities and objectives.
Okay, so governance is the board, focusing on evaluate, direct, and monitor at that strategic level. What about management then? Who's typically on the hook for that? Management responsibility usually falls to the executive leaders. Your CEO, CFO, COO, CIO, other senior execs, the people running the business day to day.
And their role compared to governance.
Their role is execution. Simple as that. It's about the daily grind of planning, building, running, and monitoring activities.
Okay.
They take that strategic direction set by the board, and they turn it into actual plans. They allocate the resources, they do the work, and they oversee operations to hit the objectives the board defined.
So if governance sets the destination and checks the map now and then,
management is navigating the ship, running the engines, dealing with the weather, making sure everything works to actually get there.
So management's work is guided by and reports back to governance.
Precisely. The source really emphasizes that relationship. Management is selected and guided by the governance body, the board. The board delegates the authority and responsibility for execution down to management, and management is accountable back up to the board.
Makes sense. So who are all the different players involved here? The stakeholders.
The source lays out quite a few, both internal and external. Internally, you've got the obvious ones, the board, management,
Right.
but also business unit managers who depend on IT, the IT managers and staff delivering the services, internal auditors or assurance providers, and risk management folks.
And externally.
Those are parties outside the company with an interest. Think regulators setting compliance rules, investors looking at performance and risk, business partners who need reliable connections or data exchange, and IT vendors supplying products or services.
And they all need different information, presumably.
Yeah, the source makes a good point there. External stakeholders usually get info focused on compliance, risk mitigation, maybe overall performance metrics, but internal stakeholders, they need and get a much deeper, more detailed level of information to actually do their jobs operating things and overseeing them properly.
That fits. Regulators care about compliance checks, investors want the bottom line and big risks, but the internal team needs the detailed operational data.
And having this clear split between governance and management responsibilities while making sure they work hand in glove is really a cornerstone of COBIT. It clarifies who does what, cuts down on potential confusion or conflict, and makes sure there's the right focus at both the strategic level and the operational level.
Okay, so with that fundamental distinction, clear governance directs and monitors, management plans and executes. Let's look at what actually makes up COBIT 2019. What are the building blocks?
Right, so the source material outlines the key inputs that went into constructing COBIT 2019. A huge foundation was, as we mentioned, the set of principles and concepts from COBIT 5.
Okay, built on COBIT 5.
Yeah, they didn't start from scratch. It evolved from that strong existing framework.
What else went into the mix?
It also explicitly pulled in 2 sets of principles that really guide how the framework is designed and used. There are 6 principles specifically for a governance system, and 3 principles for the governance framework itself. We definitely need to dig into those principles. They're fundamental.
Sounds critical. We'll get to those. Any other inputs?
The source mentions they looked at other relevant standards and regulations, integrating them where it made sense. This helps COBIT align with other best practices and legal stuff companies have to deal with.
So it plays nice with others.
Exactly. And, importantly, community contribution was a key input. Feedback, real-world experience from people actually using COBIT out there that informs the updates.
So it's practical, grounded in reality.
Hopefully, yes. That's the goal. A mix of the past version, core principles, external standards, and user feedback.
And what does all that create?
It all comes together to form the COBIT core model. The source describes this as the absolute centerpiece of the framework. It provides the structure and defines all those objectives for governing and managing IT.
Now, is this core model something you just take off the shelf and apply rigidly? Or is there room to adapt?
Oh, huge flexibility. That's one of COBIT 2019's main selling points, actually. It ties back to that tailored to enterprise needs principle we'll talk about. The core model is the base, but it's explicitly designed so you can tailor it to the specific situation of any organization.
How does that tailoring work? What tools does it provide?
It uses what the source calls design factors and focus areas.
Okay, design factors and focus areas. What are they?
Design factors are basically characteristics of your company and its environment. Things like your strategy, size, risks that influence how you should design and prioritize your governance system.
Right, they shape the design.
And focus areas are specific topics or issues like cybersecurity or data privacy or cloud that need particular attention and might require pulling together different parts of the framework.
Got it. So the inputs build the core model, which has all the objectives. Then you use these design factors and focus areas to customize that model for your specific company.
And the result is a tailored enterprise governance system that's unique to your needs and your environment. It takes the general best practices and makes them relevant and actionable for you.
And the source mentioned publications. Those are the guidebooks for doing this.
Exactly. The core publications like the Intro and Methodology, the Governance and Management Objectives Guide, the Design Guide, the Implementation Guide, they provide the detailed roadmap and the practical how-to for applying the model and doing that tailoring.
Okay, those sound like the manuals. Let's zoom back in on those principles you mentioned. You said there were 2 sets.
That's right. Principles for the governance system itself, what it should achieve, and principles for the governance framework, how COBIT itself is structured.
Let's start with the 6 principles for the governance system. These define what a good system looks like, right?
Exactly. They guide the design of your governance system for IT.
First one, provide stakeholder value. This feels like, well, the ultimate point, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. It's the prime driver.
Yeah.
The source really emphasizes that any governance system, especially for IT, exists fundamentally to create value for the organization's stakeholders.
And value isn't just money, right?
No, it's about balancing the benefits you achieve against the level of risk you take on and the resources you consume to get there. A well-designed governance system, along with an actionable strategy, is how you strike that balance and make sure IT efforts genuinely help the business succeed.
And why is it the first principle?
Because if you're not creating value, why are you doing any of this? It sets the fundamental purpose. Everything else flows from this.
Makes perfect sense. Principle number 2 for the system.
Holistic approach. This one stresses that governance isn't just one thing. It's not just about having good processes, for instance.
Okay.
The source describes it as involving diverse components that have to work together holistically. You need the processes, yes, but also the organizational structures, the policies, the right information, the culture, the people with the right skills, and the technology itself, all working together as an integrated system.
So it's the whole package deal. We'll get to those components later, I assume.
We will, but the principle here is seeing it all as interconnected.
Got it. Holistic approach. Principle 3.
Dynamic governance system. This recognizes that things change constantly. Business changes, technology changes.
Always.
So the source says the governance system has to be dynamic. If one part changes, maybe a new regulation comes in or the company's strategy shifts or a new technology emerges, you have to think about the ripple effects on all the other parts of the system.
So it has to adapt.
It has to adapt to stay relevant and effective. It means governance isn't a one-time setup. It's an ongoing, evolving activity that needs continuous attention.
Dynamic. Makes sense. Principle 4 takes us back to that core split. Governance, distinct from management.
Yes, it's so fundamental it gets its own principle for the system design. It just reinforces that governance activities and management activities are different beasts needing different structures and resources. It hammers home that separation we discussed earlier.
Okay. Principle 5. Tailored to enterprise needs.
This one brings in that flexibility we talked about.
Yeah.
A governance system can't be one size fits all. It has to be adapted to the specific needs, the context, the priorities of each individual company.
And the design factors help with that.
Exactly. The source points directly to the design factors as the mechanism for this tailoring. You wouldn't govern the IT for a small bakery the same way you govern IT for a major bank, right?
Yeah.
Tailoring is what makes COBIT practical.
Absolutely crucial. And the last principle for this system, number 6.
End-to-end governance system. This is so important today. The source emphasizes that governance isn't just about the IT department anymore.
Right. IT is everywhere.
It's embedded in everything: marketing, sales, production, HR, you name it. So the governance system has to cover all processes and activities that involve information and technology across the entire organization, end to end. It breaks down those old silos between IT and the business.
That's a big scope, end to end.
Ooh.
Okay, those 6 principles for the system give a really strong picture of what good IT governance should look like. What about the 3 principles for the governance framework itself? These describe COBIT 2019 as a tool.
Correct. These define the characteristics the framework itself needs to have to be effective and useful. The first one is based on a conceptual model.
What does having a conceptual model do for the framework?
Well, the source explains that a conceptual model identifies the key pieces, the components, the objectives, and defines how they relate to each other. It provides the underlying structure and logic.
Why is that important?
It helps with consistency. If you have a clear model, it's easier to apply the framework consistently across different areas or over time. It also potentially helps with automation if you're using tools. It gives you that solid, understandable foundation.
Okay, structure and consistency from the model. Principle 2 for the framework.
Open and flexible. Any framework dealing with tech has to be adaptable, right?
Definitely.
So this principle means COBIT needs to be open enough to incorporate new content as things evolve, like adding guidance for AI governance or cloud security updates. It also needs the flexibility to remove or change outdated stuff, all while keeping its core integrity. This lets it stay current.
Keeps it relevant in a fast-moving world. And the final principle for the framework.
Aligned to major standards. The source stresses this one. COBIT should be designed to integrate and align with other relevant standards, regulations, and frameworks that companies commonly use.
Like ATOL or ISO standards.
Exactly. ITIL for service management, ISO 27301 for security, maybe industry-specific regulations. This alignment prevents COBIT from being this isolated thing. It helps organizations meet multiple requirements efficiently without reinventing wheels everywhere.
Yeah, companies use a mix of these, so they need to work together.
Absolutely. So these principles, 6 for the system, 3 for the framework, They really form the philosophical and structural backbone of COBIT 2019. They shaped how it was built and define what it aims to be.
And they lead us right back to the heart of it all, the COBIT core model, which you said defines those governance and management objectives.
Yes, the core model lays out a comprehensive set, 40 objectives in total, that cover the whole spectrum of enterprise IT governance and management. Think of them as the desired outcomes organizations should aim for.
40 objectives, and they're grouped into domains that link back to that governance versus management split.
Exactly. The 40 objectives are organized into 5 domains. One domain holds the governance objectives, and the other 4 hold the management objectives. The structure directly mirrors that principle of keeping governance and management distinct.
Okay, let's look at the governance domain first.
That's the EDM domain, stands for Evaluate, Direct, and Monitor. This is where the governance body, the board, or its committees operates. It's all about that strategic level oversight of IT.
And how many objectives fall under EDM?
There are 5 objectives in the EDM domain. They are EDM 01, Ensured Governance Framework Setting and Maintenance.
Okay, setting up the rules.
EDM 02, Ensured Benefits Delivery.
Making sure IT delivers value.
EDM 03, Ensured Risk Optimization.
Managing risks effectively.
EDM 04, Ensured Resource Optimization.
Using resources wisely.
And EDM 05, Ensured Stakeholder Engagement.
Keeping everyone informed and involved.
Exactly. These 5 cover the high-level strategic outcomes the board needs to ensure regarding IT. Is the system set up right? Is it delivering? Are risks managed? Are resources used well? Are stakeholders happy?
Yeah, those clearly map to that evaluate, direct, monitor role of the board. Now, what about the 4 management domains, where the executives operate?
Right. These contain the management objectives covering the day-to-day work of planning, building, running, and monitoring IT. The first management domain is APO. That stands for Align, Plan, and Organize.
Align, plan, organize. What's the focus here?
APO is all about the strategic and organizational side of management, aligning IT strategy with business strategy, planning how IT resources will be handled, organizing the IT activities and structures. It's the biggest domain, actually, with 14 objectives.
14? Wow. What sort of things does APO cover?
A really wide range. The source specifically calls out managed data, APO 14, as being particularly significant now, given how critical data is.
Makes sense.
But other APO objectives cover things like managing the IT strategy itself, enterprise architecture, innovation, IT budgeting and costs, IT human resources, vendor relationships, quality, security management from a planning angle, and risk management from a planning angle too. It's really about setting the stage, designing the blueprint, getting organized before you start building or running things.
Okay, APO is the strategic planning and setup for management. What's the next management domain?
That's BAI, Build, Acquire, and Implement.
Build, acquire, implement. Sounds like where the action happens, turning plans into reality.
Precisely. BAI focuses on defining, getting, and implementing IT solutions and services and weaving them into the business processes. This is where projects get delivered, software gets developed, systems get implemented. This domain has 11 objectives.
And what kinds of activities are guided by the BAI objectives?
Things like managing requirements definition, BAI 01, identifying and actually building or acquiring solutions, BAI 0205, managing capacity and making sure things are available, BAI 03. Also managing organizational change, BAI 06, and IT change, BAI 07. Those are huge for successful rollouts.
Oh yeah, change management is key.
Definitely. Also managing knowledge, BAI 8, managing assets, BAI 9, and managing configuration, BAI 10. It's really about taking the plans from APO and actually constructing, buying, and setting up the IT capabilities the business needs.
Right, so APO plans it, BAI builds it, third management domain.
DSS, deliver, service, and support.
Deliver, service, support. Okay, this sounds like the keeping the lights on part, the operational side.
That's exactly it. DSS is focused on the day-to-day operational delivery of IT services. That includes things like security during operation and making sure business process controls that rely on IT are working. It's the domain for daily IT ops, user support, fixing things when they break. It has 6 objectives.
And what are the key areas DSS covers?
The objectives here deal with managed operations, DSS 01, handling service requests and incidents, DSS 02, managing problems to find root causes, DSS 03, business continuity planning, DSS 04, managed security services in operation, DSS 05, and managing those business process controls, DSS 06. It's all about running the IT shop day to day, keeping it available, secure, reliable, and helping the users.
Okay, APO plans, BAI builds, DSS runs and supports. What's the last management domain?
The final one is MEA, monitor, evaluate, and assess.
Monitor, evaluate, assess. Sounds like checking how well everything is actually working. The feedback loop.
You got it. MEA focuses on monitoring IT processes and performance against targets, evaluating how effective the controls are, and making sure the organization is complying with external regulations and internal policies. This domain has 4 objectives.
And what specific activities do those cover?
The objectives are manage performance and conformance monitoring,
Yeah.
MEA 01,
Checking performance against plans.
manage system of internal control, MEA 02,
Making sure controls are working.
manage compliance with external requirements, MEA A03,
Meeting legal and regulatory demands.
and managed assurance, ME 04.
Getting independent checks like audits.
Exactly. This domain is all about measurement, recording, internal checks, external audits, and generally making sure IT is hitting its goals, controls are effective, and the company is compliant.
So the whole core model structure is built around these 5 domains. EDM for governance, evaluate, direct, monitor, and then APO, BAI, DSS, MEA for management. Align, plan, organize, build, acquire, implement, deliver service support, and monitor, evaluate, assess.
Right.
With those 40 objectives spread across them.
Right, and that whole structure, that set of objectives, provides a really comprehensive map, or checklist maybe, of everything a company needs to think about to govern and manage its IT effectively, linking those high-level strategic goals all the way down to operational activities.
It definitely sounds like a solid, comprehensive structure. But okay, how does a company actually use this? How do they take this framework and figure out where they stand, what needs fixing? This seems like where that Alliance Core example from the source material really helps.
Oh, it's a perfect case study for seeing COBIT in action. It shows exactly how a company can use it as like a diagnostic tool and then as a guide for making changes.
So tell us about Alliance Core. What was their situation?
The source describes them as a high-end furniture retailer and manufacturer. And like a lot of companies, they were struggling to really align their IT processes and spending with their main business objectives. They knew IT was important, but they weren't sure it was pulling its weight efficiently.
Yeah, that sounds familiar for a lot of places. So how did they use COBIT to tackle that?
Well, their CEO and CIO decided to use COBIT 2019 as a benchmark, basically, to assess where they were currently at. The core of what they did was get the executive team together to assess the company's performance against all 40 of the COBIT governance and management objectives.
All 40. Wow, that's a detailed look in the mirror. What were they looking for during that assessment?
For every single objective, they asked 2 questions. First, is there a gap between how we're doing now and what this objective says we should be doing? And second, how important is this objective for our specific business and strategy?
So identifying gaps, but also prioritizing.
Yeah.
Because not everything is equally critical for everyone, right?
Exactly. That prioritization is key to making it manageable and focusing effort where it matters most.
Now, this source gives us a peek at their assessment just for the EDM domain, those 5 governance objectives.
Yeah.
What did Alliance Core find out about how well their IT governance was working?
Uh-oh. The assessment showed some pretty big problems. They found gaps in 4 out of the 5 EDM objectives.
4 out of 5 at the governance level. That suggests some fundamental issues with oversight, doesn't it?
It really does.
Which one wasn't a gap?
The only EDM objective where they felt they were okay was EDM 05, ensured stakeholder engagement. The source actually notes that their stakeholders were generally supportive and communicated pretty well about the existing IT strategy.
Huh. That's interesting. So even with other big governance problems, they had stakeholder buy-in. That's often a hurdle itself.
It is a valuable piece of good news amidst the bad, perhaps. It gives them a foundation to build on.
Okay, so stakeholder engagement was all right, but the other 4 governance areas, framework setting, benefits, risk, resources, all had gaps. Why? What was wrong with EDM 01? Ensured governance, framework setting, and maintenance.
The source says the gap there was because Alliance Core basically lacked a consistent, defined way to align IT governance with the company's main goals. They also had issues with legal compliance related to IT, and the processes they did have weren't really being overseen effectively by the right people.
So the fundamental structure for governing IT just wasn't properly set up or maintained.
Pretty much a lack of rigor at the foundation.
And what about the other 3 gaps in EDM? Benefits delivery, EDM 02, risk optimization, EDM 03, and resource optimization, EDM 04.
For those, the assessment pointed to very real, tangible problems. The source mentions things like IT services and staff not being delivered or used cost-effectively.
Wasted money.
Yeah, and significant overlap between different IT-related processes across the company, which led to wasted expenses and inefficient use of people and tech.
Okay, inefficiency, duplicated effort. Classic symptoms of poor optimization.
Exactly. And here's the crucial link the source makes. These inefficiencies and wasted resources weren't just minor operational headaches. They meant the company was actually operating at a much higher level of risk than their own stated risk appetite.
Whoa, how so?
Because the lack of optimized processes, the wasted effort, the unclear responsibilities, it all contributed to control weaknesses and potential failures. They were essentially taking on excessive risk without even realizing it, all stemming from those governance gaps in managing benefits, risk, and resources.
That really drives it home. The Alliance Core example shows how those abstract governance objectives directly connect to concrete business problems like inefficiency, wasted money, and dangerously high risk levels.
It's a powerful illustration. Using COBIT for that gap analysis clearly pinpointed serious issues impacting their bottom line and their overall security posture.
So, finding these problems is one thing. What did Alliance Core actually do about it based on this assessment?
Well, seeing these results really lit a fire under the executive team. They committed to a major overhaul of their IT function, specifically targeting those gaps they'd identified. The source lists several concrete actions they took.
Okay.
First, they focused on eliminating duplicative processes. That directly tackled the overlap and wasted expense issue found in the EDM assessment.
Makes sense. Cut the waste.
Second, they put in place a stricter budget and purchase approval process for IT that aimed right at the cost effectiveness and resource optimization gaps.
Tightening the purse strings.
Third, they actually required employees to use the company help desk for remote tech support, rather than maybe trying to fix things themselves or calling random IT folks.
Trying to improve process control and maybe track issues better.
Exactly. Centralized support, optimize how IT staff time was used, and fourth, and this is a big one, they started repurposing IT staff who were stuck doing low-value tasks.
Moving people around.
Yeah, reassigning them to activities that actually aligned better with the newly prioritized governance objectives. This hit both resource optimization and that fundamental strategic alignment problem.
That's fantastic. It shows how the framework assessment isn't just some theoretical exercise you put on a shelf.
Right.
It's a practical tool. You diagnose real business problems, and it guides you towards specific, concrete changes that can improve efficiency, lower risk, and get IT truly working for the business. It bridges that gap between knowing what's wrong and figuring out how to fix it.
Exactly right. The Alliance Core story makes those abstract COBIT principles and objectives really tangible and shows the framework's value in practice.
Okay, so we've covered the core model, the domains, the 40 objectives. We've seen how a company like Alliance Core can use it to assess themselves. But how do you actually achieve those objectives day to day?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that governance and management depend on different components working together.
Yes. The objectives in the core model define the what you want to achieve. But to actually do it, the COBIT 2019 framework identifies 7 categories of components. These are the elements you need to put in place and manage well to make the whole governance and management system successful.
7 types of components. Okay, let's quickly run through them. What's the first one?
First up, processes. This is probably the most obvious one. Processes are those defined sets of activities designed to hit specific objectives and produce certain outputs.
Like a change management process.
Exactly. Vulnerability management, incident response, budget approval. These are the documented steps for how things get done in IT governance and management.
Okay, processes. Second component.
Organizational structures. These are the decision-making bodies in the company. Think committees, specific teams, departments, key roles, reporting lines, who makes the call on risk acceptance, who approves the IT budget. These structures define who's accountable and who has authority.
Right, the org chart for governance and management. Third.
Principles, policies, and frameworks. These are the tools you use to translate the desired behavior and strategy into practical, day-to-day guidance.
The rules of the road.
Pretty much. Your IT security policy, your data classification principles, even using the COBIT framework itself falls into this category. They guide how people act and how decisions get made about IT.
Okay. Fourth component.
Information. This refers to all the data and intelligence the governance system itself needs to work properly.
Information for the system, not just managed by the system.
Exactly. To monitor performance, assess risk, evaluate strategy, report on compliance, you need accurate, timely, relevant information about the IT processes and their environment. If the information feeding the governance system is garbage, the decisions will be too.
Garbage in, garbage out. Got it. Fifth component, culture, ethics, and behavior. This sounds a bit different, more human.
It is, and it's incredibly important, but often the hardest one to get right. This is about the collective attitudes, the shared ethical values, and the individual behaviors of people across the organization.
How people actually act.
Yeah. It massively influences whether governance and management activities succeed or fail. You can have the world's best processes and policies written down, but if the culture doesn't value security, or if ethical behavior isn't genuinely encouraged and rewarded, the system will break down. It's about what people do, not just what the rules say.
That really underscores the people side of things. Sixth component.
People, skills, and competencies. This focuses on the individuals involved and what they can do. To govern and manage IT effectively, you need people with the right knowledge, the right skills, the right experience, and the right roles.
From the techies to the executives.
Absolutely. You need skilled people to execute the processes, make informed judgments, and provide that strategic oversight. Having the right talent is crucial.
Makes sense. And the seventh, final component.
Services, infrastructure, and applications. These are the actual tech assets themselves. The IT services being delivered, the underlying infrastructure servers, networks, cloud platforms, and the applications the business uses.
So the things being governed and managed.
Yes, but they can also be tools used by the governance system itself. Think about using specific GRC, governance, risk, compliance, software, or monitoring tools. Those are part of this component too.
Okay, so those 7 components, processes, structures, policies, information, culture, people, and tech services, are the building blocks organizations use to actually achieve those 40 objectives.
That's the idea. You deploy, configure, and manage these components effectively to make the objectives happen.
And they're all links, right? Change one,
Yeah.
and it affects others.
Definitely. The source really stresses their interaction. If you improve a process, component 1, you might need to change the team responsible for it, component 2, maybe improve the information they get, component 4, and possibly train the people involved with new skills, component 6.
It reinforces that holistic approach principle again.
Exactly. You have to look at the whole system, not just tweak one piece in isolation.
It's clear COBIT provides this really detailed structure. Objectives tell you what to do, components tell you how. But how does a company take all this comprehensive stuff and make it truly specific and relevant for them? That's where the tailoring comes back in, with those design factors and focus areas.
Yes, and this is so important. COBIT 2019 is explicitly designed not to be a rigid, one-size-fits-all mandate. That tailoring mechanism is absolutely critical for making it practical.
The source lists 11 design factors that influence tailoring. What exactly do these factors do?
Think of the design factors as variables that help an organization understand its own unique context and set its priorities. By looking at these factors, a company can figure out which of those 40 COBIT objectives are most critical for them, which components need the most attention, and where to focus their improvement efforts first.
So they help translate the company's reality into a specific COBIT configuration.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
Okay, let's quickly walk through some of these 11 factors to get a feel for them. First one, enterprise strategy.
This is huge. What's the company's main game plan? Are they all about aggressive growth or leading through innovation? Maybe they're focused on being the lowest cost provider, or maybe top-notch client service is everything.
How does that affect IT governance?
Well, your core strategy dictates what IT needs to do to support it. An innovation-focused company will need to prioritize COBIT objectives related to agile development and fast deployment, maybe in the BAI domain. A cost leader will be laser-focused on resource optimization like EDM04 and maybe APO objectives around budgeting. IT governance has to enable the business strategy.
Makes total sense. IT serves the business strategy. Second factor, enterprise goals.
These are the specific targets that support the overall strategy. The source suggests thinking about them using balanced scorecard categories: financial goals, customer goals, internal process goals, learning, and growth goals.
So what are we trying to achieve specifically?
Right. And your IT goals, which you derive using COBIT objectives, have to align with and directly support those enterprise goals. If a key company goal is boosting customer satisfaction, then IT governance needs to prioritize objectives around service quality and support, likely from the DSS domain.
Okay. Third factor, risk profile.
What specific risks keep the leadership up at night? The source gives examples like IT system outages, problems adopting new software, failing to meet regulations, maybe risks around innovation itself, or even geopolitical stuff impacting IT.
So understanding your specific threats.
Exactly. Knowing your risk profile, whether it's mainly cybersecurity, data privacy concerns, or operational reliability worries, is crucial for prioritizing governance objectives focused on risk optimization, like EDMO3, and security management, like APO13 or DSSO5.
Fourth factor, information and technology INT issues.
This is about the problems you already know you have with IT. Maybe you keep getting dinged on the same things in audits, or IT resources are always stretched thin. Maybe there's constant friction between IT and the business units, or lots of shadow IT spending happening. Poor data quality, past compliance failures.
So the current pain points.
Yeah. These known issues immediately highlight specific areas or objectives within COBIT that need urgent attention and should be prioritized in your tailored system.
Fifth factor, threat landscape.
This looks outward at the security environment. Is your company operating in a normal threat landscape, or is it high? This might depend on your industry. Finance, healthcare, critical infrastructure are often high-threat targets. Or maybe your company's public profile makes it a target, or geopolitical tension.
And a higher threat level means.
It demands a significantly stronger focus on security-related objectives and components across the board: planning security, APO, implementing secure changes, BAI, running secure operations, DSS, and monitoring compliance and controls, MEA.
Okay, sixth factor, compliance requirements.
What specific laws, regulations, or contracts does the company have to follow regarding IT and data? The source classifies this burden as low, normal, or high. Think industry rules like HIPAA for healthcare, data privacy laws like GDPR or CCPA, financial regulations like SOX for public companies, or even just contractual promises made to partners.
And more requirements mean.
A higher compliance burden means you absolutely have to prioritize objectives in the MEA domain compliance and assurance, plus related objectives in BAI and DSS that deal with implementing and operating the necessary controls effectively.
Seventh factor, role of IT. Is that this one provides a neat categorization.
Yeah, the source defines 4 clear roles IT can play in a business. Support. IT is needed, but failure isn't instantly catastrophic. Think basic office functions, factory. IT failure immediately disrupts core operations, like an assembly line stopping or a trading system going down. Turnaround. IT isn't critical for today's operations, but it's key for driving future innovation and strategy. Strategic. IT is absolutely vital for both current operations and future strategy. Most digital businesses live here now.
And the role dictates the governance needs.
Massively. The level of rigor, the investment, the focus required for support IT is vastly different from strategic IT. It affects how you prioritize pretty much all the COBIT objectives.
That makes the importance crystal clear. Eighth factor, sourcing model for IT.
How does the company get its IT done? Mostly in-house staff. Heavily outsourced. Relying on cloud providers. Or some mix.
How does that change things?
Your sourcing model really impacts which objectives need focus, especially things like vendor management, APO10, service delivery monitoring, DSS, security oversight, APO13, DSSO5, and managing contracts. If you outsource a lot, you need really strong governance over those third parties.
Makes sense. You're managing external providers. Ninth factor, IT implementation methods.
How does the company actually build or roll out new IT stuff? Are they mostly agile, using DevOps, still doing traditional waterfall projects? Or a hybrid?
How does the how affect governance?
The method shapes how you approach and govern the management objectives, especially in the BAI domain: build, acquire, implement. Agile and DevOps need governance that's fast, flexible, and built into the cycles, which is very different from the big phase gate reviews you see in waterfall.
10th factor, technology adoption strategy.
How fast does the company jump on new tech? Are they always trying to be the first mover for a competitive edge? Do they follow once tech is proven? Or are they slow adopters, sticking with the old stuff until they absolutely have to change?
And this influences.
It affects how much you prioritize objectives around innovation, like APO3, and also how you manage the risks that come with either bleeding edge tech or, conversely, aging, unsupported tech.
Okay, and the last factor, number 11, enterprise size.
The source keeps it simple. Large is over 250 employees, small-medium is 50-250. While COBIT's principles apply to everyone, the complexity of your governance structures, how formal your processes are, and the resources you have will obviously differ massively between a small shop and a global giant. Tailoring has to reflect that scale.
So by working through these 11 design factors, a company gets a really clear picture of its own unique context.
Exactly, and that allows them to do that gap analysis like Alliance Core did, but with informed priorities. They can focus their energy on the COBIT objectives and components that will give them the biggest bang for their buck and address their most significant risks.
It turns that potentially overwhelming list of 40 objectives into a targeted, prioritized action plan based on reality. Now, alongside design factors, you also mentioned focus areas. What are those again?
Right. Focus areas are basically specific, hot topics or major governance issues that are particularly relevant today and need dedicated attention. The source gives examples like cybersecurity, cloud computing, digital transformation.
Are these separate frameworks?
No, not at all. There's specific areas where you pull together the relevant COBIT objectives, components, and maybe consider certain design factors to address that topic comprehensively using the main COBIT structure.
And the source said the number of focus areas is unlimited.
It did, which really highlights COBIT's flexibility. As new challenges pop up, maybe AI ethics, IT sustainability, quantum computing risk, organizations can define these as new focus areas and apply the relevant bits of COBIT 2019 to get a handle on governing them effectively.
Okay, so design factors help tailor the whole system to the company context, while focus areas help apply the system to specific critical topics. It's all about making COBIT practical and usable.
That's the goal. And tying this all together, giving you the detailed how-to for using the framework, doing assessments, tailoring the system, implementing improvements, that's where those core COBIT 2019 publications come in.
Let's just quickly recap those 4 publications again. They're the user guides, essentially.
Right. The source lists 4 main ones. First, the COBIT 2019 framework, Introduction and Methodology. That lays out the overall concepts, principles, structure, basically everything we've discussed conceptually.
The foundation.
Then, the COBIT 2019 framework, Governance and Management Objectives. This is the deep dive reference for all 40 objectives and the 7 components needed for each one. The detailed catalog, if you like.
Okay, and the guides for actually using it.
Yep. The COBIT 2019 Design Guide gives you the step-by-step process and things to consider for tailoring your governance system using those 11 design factors.
The How-to Tailor Manual.
And finally, the COBIT 2019 Implementation Guide. This offers a practical roadmap for actually setting up and continuously improving your IT governance, and it's designed to be used hand in hand with the design guide.
The How to Implement and Improve Manual.
Yeah.
Okay, so those 4 books together give you the full toolkit needed to take the COBIT principles and model and actually make them work in your specific organization.
They are the practical tools for putting COBIT 2019 into operation.
Wow, okay. That was a really thorough deep dive into the COBIT 2019 framework, all based on the source material provided. We've traced its journey from its origins as standards for auditors, all the way to being this comprehensive framework for enterprise governance and management of IT.
We clarified that absolutely fundamental distinction between governance, the board's role of evaluating, directing, monitoring, and management, the executive's role of planning, building, running, monitoring.
We explored the 9 key principles guiding the system and the framework itself. We detailed the COBIT core model with its 5 domains, EDM for governance, APO, BAI, DSS, MEA for management, and the 40 objectives within them.
And we looked at those 7 types of components, the processes, structures, policies, information, culture, people, and tech that actually make the system function day to day.
Plus, we dug into how COBIT 2019 becomes relevant for any organization through tailoring, using those 11 design factors and the concept of focus areas.
And that Alliance Core case study really brought it to life, didn't it? Showing how applying the framework can diagnose critical issues like inefficiency and excessive risk, and then drive specific, targeted improvements that make a real business difference.
Absolutely. It makes it clear that COBIT 2019 isn't just some theoretical checklist for IT.
Yeah.
It's a really comprehensive, structured, yet flexible approach designed to help organizations grapple with that huge challenge of making sure their IT doesn't just, work, but actually drives strategy, manages risk properly, uses resources wisely, and ultimately creates real, measurable value for the business and its stakeholders.
Yeah, the Alliance Core example showed how that structure delivers tangible results. It identifies specific problems and helps guide the solutions.
It gives everyone a common language, a repeatable way to think about these things can be adapted to pretty much any company, any size, any industry, any strategy. It's really about bringing clarity and control to this increasingly vital, complex world of enterprise IT.
Exactly. Structure and adaptability.
So thinking about all this, Here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. Reflecting particularly on that principle of a dynamic governance system and that wide range of design factors we just discussed. Given how incredibly fast everything changes, technology, threats, business needs, regulations, how can an organization use a framework like COBIT not just to get organized today, but to actually build in the flexibility, the foresight, the continuous adaptation needed to create real resilience and agility in its approach to IT governance for the long haul?
That's the key question, isn't it?
How does really thinking through these principles and factors prepare you, not just for the challenges you see now, but for the ones you haven't even encountered yet in this constantly shifting digital landscape? Something to think about.
It's about moving beyond a static checklist to building a dynamic capability for managing IT in an uncertain future.
A powerful way to put it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the COBIT 2019 framework. We really hope this conversation has given you some valuable insights and a much clearer picture of this important standard and the role it plays in effective IT governance and management today.